So, hi everybody. Let's get started. Recording is running. So, welcome everybody to today's second lesson in our SpecFlow or BDD Masterclass. Today it's all about formulation and the best practices for writing SpecFlow BDD scenarios. Again, we have Kasper with us today, trainer and author and founding member of SpecFlow, and I'm Andreas Willich, the community manager of SpecFlow. Short reminder, recap from yesterday, same guidelines as yesterday. Please use the Q&A tool for questions somewhere down there button. Please use the upvote functionality. If you're interested in a question, we will try to answer them in the order of the votes, and we can't promise that we get to all questions. And we will do this in the dedicated Q&A part at the end. Please don't use the chat for questions. It's too hard to monitor and remember for us. Too many people in the stuff. We'll have again a quiz during the webinar, so keep your phones ready. And again, if you attend all 4 webinars, there's also a raffle where you could win an Amazon voucher. And before Kasper is starting, I have again a short poll for you. Same one like yesterday, except one additional question. If you attended yesterday's lesson. It's always then interesting on the second day how the distribution of roles is changing. Good, I give you some seconds. And thank you. So share the results with you. That you also. So about 50-50 again, Gasper. If our audience has used SpecFlow again, the distribution of the roles didn't change that much.
Well, if you look at the last question, then you will understand why.
Yes, we have 90% from yesterday. Good. Then welcome everybody again, and hello to the new people here. And with that, Gasper, it's your stage.
Thank you very much. And just please confirm if you see my screen.
Yes, I can see it.
Perfect. So welcome everyone from the different parts of the world, and we will continue our BDD masterclass. This is the second day. As we have seen from the poll, most of you were here today, so I don't want to spend too much time on the prep stuff. So basically, at least for those who are new to that, the concept of masterclass we imagined last year, and our idea with the masterclass was that that we would like to make some good and free material for the people that they can use to level up their BDD and or SpecFlow knowledge, and it should be working even if you have already used BDD and SpecFlow, but also if you are new to the topics. It goes beyond some basic introduction. That's why we have also this length. As you have the ones who have been here yesterday now learned how this longer time works, and most of the lessons will not need coding skills. This particular lesson doesn't need any coding skills to follow. Tomorrow we will have more code. It's mainly a presentational style, but a sample application is available, so you can also play with that. And as you have seen yesterday, we have an extended longer Q&A at the end. Hopefully I will be able to manage my time, and we will still have time for the questions just like yesterday. If you are interested in more hands-on and interactive courses, of course, with much less people, then I have instructor-led online and now also on-site courses as well about SpecFlow and BDD. Just check out my site and you will find details about that, or you can obviously also contact me. So this is a masterclass, so I will try to go to some deeper things as well, and sometimes you might hear some strange or provocative statements. Maybe if I just say that a scenario cannot contain multiple then steps, then you might be surprised. Feel free to contact me, feel free to ask in the Q&A, and I'm happy to have a discussion about why I said that particular sentence. But of course, it can happen that the answer will be that. I am your master, bail me your shell. That's a masterclass joke that I had yesterday as well, and I promise to have that tomorrow as well. So a quick overview of the 4 lessons that we have. So in yesterday's lesson, we wanted to see how the overview of the BDD and SpecFlow process looks like, so that what are the key benefits or key promises of BDD, and how does it integrate into a development workflow, and how does it relate to different testing techniques. So that was the yesterday's lesson. Today, as Andy was mentioning, we were trying to focus on that, how to write good BDD scenarios. We will see multiple different aspects of that. Tomorrow we will dive deep into the SpecFlow details, so some automation stuff, and on Thursday we will see what kind of challenges are coming up and what kind of solutions do we have if we need to maintain a bigger BDD solution or bigger SpecFlow solution. So these are the lessons, and just like yesterday, we will continue using our demo project. Today there will be no code demo part, but at least the examples most of them will be related to that. It's a simple Q&A site called Spec Overflow, and it basically works more or less how you imagine, but it's an open source project, so you can also download that and play with it. Try it out yourself, try to automate some aspects that are not automated. That you can even send a pull request if you want. Andy was pasting the link to the chat window, hopefully. Today we will have quite many different topics that I would like to address. I would like to start with a 3-minute BDD summary. Most of you were here yesterday, so I don't want to I would like to keep it short, but just to recap and just getting back our memories, or if someone wasn't here, then introduce what we wanted to share about that. And then we would like to focus on this formulation topic, starting with the simple questions like what is formulation, what does this really mean, and then we will think about business rules. This is a very fancy or funny term. It will be not so easy to understand what I mean on that, but whenever we get there, probably I will try to make it clearer. And then we will see, and this is also something that I already announced yesterday, that how you can use the BDD scenario or how is it related to test transcribing. So what happens if you have an existing longer test, how much it is possible to rewrite that in a form of a scenario. And so there will be a part where we will talk about that. And during that part, we will also learn about some good scenario writing principles. We are calling them brief principles. It's an acronym. We will see later what they mean. And then we will also see about the relation of formulation to automation, and shall we consider automation when we formulate our scenarios. We'll talk about data-driven scenarios, and finally some final notes on the readability on some additional stuff for the readability of scenarios. So quite many topics. Let's jump into that. As I said, I would like to start with the 3-minute BDD summary. And basically my starting slide is the same starting slides that I had yesterday. So BDD can be addressed from multiple different angles and multiple different ways. Yesterday, I was demonstrating BDD as something which is able to make a bridge between the requirements and the solution. And we were talking about what does this bridge nature means. And we said that there might be multiple different motivations for that. But the typical motivations are that we would like to make the requirements more testable, or we would like to make our tests better understandable for everyone in the team. And at the end, if you do it well, then hopefully the BDD scenarios will be those things that are understandable by the business, but concrete enough so that we can use them as automated tests as well. And then the automated test nature of BDD is also very important, because many people are just seeing BDD scenarios as automated tests, a different form of an automated test. But it's very important, and yesterday we were talking about that the BDD scenarios are not only automated tests, they are also illustration of the requirements. So this means that if you are describing your behavior, your expectations in a form of a scenario, then it will be much easier to immediately make it right by the developers when they are implementing the application code. And also the scenarios are acting as a documentation of the behavior, which is also very important, because typically projects are long and they are even changing. So it's good to know what kind of agreements we did and what we wanted to implement, what were the expectations that we fulfilled with that particular application. And from that, we have seen that that BDD is not only testing, and basically through that we finally got to the definition of BDD, where we said that there are multiple definitions, but maybe this is a simple one. Like, behavior-driven development is about understanding, documenting, and verifying the business requirements through illustrative scenarios. And again, the thing that I want to highlight here is that we would like to focus on the business requirements. And whenever we will talk today about the business rules, that's something that I would like to reflect back on. To be able to implement BDD, to be able to do that in a standard development process, basically we need to include three different practices, three different activities into our process. The first one that we call discovery. This is basically when we are discussing about the details of the user stories or the requirements, and try to identify some illustrative examples, key examples that are demonstrating what we want to do. These examples can be seen as a lightweight form of a scenario, but at the end we need a proper scenario. So we need the practice called formulation, when we are writing down or specifying those details in a properly formulated scenario. That's what will be the topic of today. And obviously we also need automation to be able to make these scenarios able to verify our system. So that's basically those were basically the things that the most important things that I wanted to highlight about BDD. A little bit more than 3 minutes, but almost good. And we are in a SpecFlow masterclass as well at the same time, so it probably makes sense to highlight that SpecFlow is basically the far most popular BDD framework for .NET. It's the official official .NET version of Cucumber. It's highly compatible with Cucumber. So if you are coming from a different platform and you have already had some experience with Cucumber, then you will find SpecFlow very familiar to you. SpecFlow is executing the scenarios with the automation code you provide. So of course, SpecFlow is not able to understand what you have written there in English or in other languages, but you can provide the automation blocks for the different steps, and SpecFlow will be able to put together some useful thing out of that. And yesterday I was too lazy to update my slide, so for today I updated the slide with the latest figures. So now we just check that we have 186 contributors, which is a very nice number. 33 million downloads on NuGet, which is also a nice number. And yeah, so that's for the BDD intro, at least for today. And now we can move on to our first today's topic, thing. What is formulation? And let me just start with the definition so that that we can really base all the remaining things on that. So we can say that formulation is an activity when we document domain examples as BDD scenarios with a given when then keyword. Um, it's so that's basically what we are doing. We are writing them down, or some people call them specifying if you rather want to do that. But I think documentation is also a good keyword that we are doing here. And nowadays, at least with BDD, the given when then keywords are somehow super important, because this is how we can highlight the different aspects of the scenario. We will talk about that a little bit later. So formulation is writing down the scenario, and the scenario is a test. We have seen that it's other things as well. So so I think it makes sense to compare the scenario writing, so the formulation activity, with the classic test writing or test design activity. And again, both of these activities are important. So I never said and never wanted to say that that BDD or BDD formulation is replacing other testing activities. So so these are working typically well together. But let's just compare these two things, that how much they are different. So again, I will have a couple of bullet points for the test design or test writing and for the formulation, so that you can see the key differences. So typically when you are writing a new test or designing a new test, then what you need to do, you need to analyze the business requirements, because based on that you will make your test case. You will also do some testing methods and heuristics and techniques. For example, you will just find some equivalence groups of the input and whatever. You just calculate multiple different things. You typically, when for test case design, you might want to consider maybe edge cases. Maybe you are just thinking about the test data. I think test data is a very important topic of test design, so that how can we get that, what kind of test data will be useful, how to find a consistent set of test data whatsoever. And of course, besides all these other things, which is basically thinking and designing, at the end, you might also want to write down the script itself that is basically describing your test case. In compare to that, the formulation is a little bit different, because especially if you have followed the separation of activities like the discovery, formulation, automation, then the business analyzing the business requirements have been already done. So basically the business rules have been already discussed by the team during the discovery, and we have already identified some key examples. These examples are already there in virtual post-its or whatever, in physical post-its. And those examples are basically telling us what to do. They are just not telling it in the right form. We said yesterday that these examples can be seen as a lightweight form of a scenario. So what we are really doing during the formulation is that we are is to describe the example in a more formal way, so that that the tool can, like SpecFlow, can work with it, or that it works as a long-term documentation. So it should be, that's the time when we want to properly write down the thing. So based on that, you see that that these two things are quite different. Maybe the write the test script is a little bit similar to what we do as formulation, but typically in test design, test case writing, we are doing different things. We are doing much more discovery related works as well. With BDD formulation, hopefully this discovery related work is already done, and then we only need to focus on the actual representation or the documentation of this of the particular case. Okay, so again, just to give you some feeling, I was trying to collect some typical things, typical tasks, typical activities that you do during a formulation session. Hopefully you remember from yesterday that yesterday we said that formulating scenarios alone is not really good. If you are doing it alone, then it's very easy to get in the wrong track. So typically formulation is a collaborative activity, but also at the same time, it doesn't make sense to formulate with a too big group. So if you try to convince 6, 7 people to write down English sentences, then you will see that that this will not really efficient. Many people will just be idle or cannot really contribute to that, and that's not really useful. Uh, the experience shows that that usually with a pair of people, this thing can be very well done. So whenever we say these activities, then imagine a pair of people is thinking about these things. So for example, you are doing things like identifying the context, action, and the outcome part of the example. So what was happening before? What is the thing that we are doing, and what is the outcome? So, for example, in such a session, you might hear a sentence that, okay, is this preparation step really important to be able to get the expected outcome, or we can just ignore that for now because it's not relevant. That could be a good thing. Uh, uh, Sometimes we are also using the formulation to review the business terminology that we use, so that maybe in the example we were just writing user, but now it's the question that we can think about that should we really call it user, or shall we call it client in this product, in this domain? What is the most proper term that we want to use for this particular entity or this particular activity that the entities are doing? Of course, we might want to turn the scenarios to more proper English. I mean, how much the English is your native languages, that's another thing. But definitely we are thinking about grammar, tenses, word ordering, and other things as well. So maybe a sentence that you hear in such a session is that, okay, this has happened earlier, so actually we should use a past tense so that we can highlight that this is already done. That's a kind of thing that you can also do. We might also want to reuse existing phrasing styles because from other scenarios, because what we would like to do is that we are building up a documentation with these scenarios. So we'd like to have a consistent documentation. So it's if we were saying it this way for that feature, we should also say it similarly for this feature as well. So so again, a sentence like that. Okay, I think that this scenario that there was another scenario that we're describing a similar problem. Let's look at that. Let's see how we phrased it there, and let's just copy the style. So that's also a common thing that you do, or maybe when we use the full step, and we can also think about whether those steps that we are listing are really making a sequential flow. The way how the BDD tools are automating the scenarios, they are automating these steps in a sequential order. So somehow we need to also verify that. So maybe a question that, okay, the question has to be voted earlier by another user because otherwise you cannot vote them. So maybe we just need to change the order of the steps. That's also happening sometimes during a formulation session. So maybe with these activities or these examples, you get a little bit of better feeling what kind of discussions we might have during formulation. As a kind of summary or message, I said that from that you will see that that formulation is mostly about documentation. It's the automation is not the most important topic, at least not what we would like to focus on right now. Of course, we know about that, but it's not the most important topic. So we said yesterday that formulation is a collaborative task. Like that's something that that I just mentioned. Typically, a dev and a tester makes a good pair. Sometimes you need to have feedback and input from other members of the team. So you might want to introduce some sort of review process. And yesterday I was showing the Gherkin editor as a tool that you can play with to be able to edit the scenarios together. But of course, you can use other tools as well. Yesterday, we were showing this quick summary of of how a scenario look like. I don't want to go through that and too much in detail, but again, I would like to highlight, and yesterday we had a great question about that related to the end step. I would like to highlight that structurally, the scenario has three different kinds of steps: the given steps, which are describing the context, the when steps, when step that is initiating the behavior, and the then step, which is describing the expected outcome. And if you have multiple of some kind, so in this case we have two given steps, then you can use the end keyword to be able to just repeat or just make it better readable. And at this point, I would like to highlight that for the when step, I didn't just say that this is an action, because sometimes in the given step, there are also some actions. Maybe we had to do some action to be able to get to the stage that we want to describe right now. But this is the action that is initiating the behavior, that is triggering the behavior. And if you see it like that, that this is the one which is finally switching the thing to the thing that we want, that to be able to see the expected outcome, then naturally what comes out of that there has to be one thing which is finally triggering that outcome, or finally initiating the behavior. And because of that, if you follow this kind of thinking, then you will see that there can be only one when step, because if there are two when steps, then basically the first one was a prerequisite that had to happen earlier to be able to have the second one as the one that is triggering the thing. So from that, what comes out, and maybe that's again something a little bit more provocative for you, that normally you should have only one step in a scenario. When we were working on the formulation book with Seb, we wanted to, when we were about to write this very concrete statement into the book, we were a little bit afraid that, okay, are we just missing something? So we were doing a quite intensive research to be able to find some good examples where multiple when steps make sense. And we have found a couple of scenarios with multiple when steps, but we all realized that those were actually not improper from that definition point of view. So finally, we couldn't find any case where meaningfully you can have multiple when steps, or it makes sense to have multiple when steps. So that's how it is. SpecFlow will not stop you to do that, but from the logic point of view, that wouldn't make sense. The language that we are using to describe the scenarios is following some certain syntax. You have seen the different keywords in my previous slides or yesterday. So you have seen that we have a keyword called scenario. We have keywords like given, when, and then. So that syntax, that syntactical elements are described by a name. That's a syntax name. The syntax name is called Gherkin. It's not the best name. Actually, it is called Gherkin because it was introduced by the Cucumber tool, and whatever, they wanted to find some name for that, and they just got to Gherkin, and that's the avalanche of different vegetables making interactions with tests kind of stories are starting. But anyway, so it's called the Gherkin syntax. The Gherkin syntax is defining those these keywords and the structure of the keywords. And it's, I don't know how you feel about that, but it's also very interesting that, for example, the given, when, then keywords, that we think that these are the most important elements of BDD, were actually not introduced by Dan Nor. So BDD has been existing for a couple of years before given, when, then being introduced to that. And another person called Chris Metz was suggesting that that we could even better emphasize or document or make readable these scenarios using the given, when, and then keywords. And this is what the community has basically picked up, and nowadays these are just a very common part of that. This has happened before Cucumber even born. So so the language, as I said, it was developed as part of Cucumber, but then later on promoted as a tool agnostic format, which is a very good thing. So this means that if you will learn how to write good scenarios for SpecFlow, then this knowledge can be also used if you happen to need to write a couple of scenarios for your JavaScript thing in Cucumber.js, for example. It supports multiple different development platforms, and programming languages, even some more fancy things like you can find the Gherkin parser for Elixir, and basically all the other common languages. You will find one, and the design of this language, which is definitely not a programming language, was designed to be simple. That means that it on purpose doesn't have things like conditions, doesn't have things like variables, doesn't have things like loops and similar things. This is a typical question that people ask, that, okay, why don't we introduce variables? Why don't we introduce conditionals? Why don't we introduce looping or some other programming constructs? We could, so it's not a technical limitation. But the concept is that we would like to keep these scenarios business readable, okay? And to be able to get feedback about a particular test case, a particular scenario, I don't want to teach the business to be able to understand what is a variable or what is a condition, what is a loop, and how that particular loop works, and all these things. So that's why it's on purpose designed to be super simple, so that it really makes it readable for everyone, and doesn't lock out people who are not necessarily familiar with these development concepts like variables, which is not an easy one. If you ever try to teach anyone who is never programmed, it's not so easy. I'm regularly trying to teach my kids for programming basics, and it's not so easy to understand what a variable is. The Gherkin language is introducing a couple of core elements. Basically, you see a Gherkin cheat sheet, and this is something that you will anyway get the slides, and you will get access to the cheat sheet as well. So basically, what you can see here is that the scenarios that we were talking about are typically put into they are put into a file, and the file is called a feature file, which is starting with a feature keyword, with a feature name. It can have some free text description. The features can have tags. The scenarios can also have some tags, which are just different labels, and you can also use a rule keyword to basically group the scenarios under different rules. We will come back to that later. And then the give and then steps that we have seen so far. There is another construct that you can use, which is called a data table. So if you have a table, if you have a step with a little bit more detailed data attached, tabular style data attached, then you can also use the data table construct. And that's basically the very high level overview of what you can do, at least as Gherkin basics. So just basically getting to the end of this formulation intro stuff. I just again, just a reminder from yesterday that how scenarios are created. So you probably remember from there that normally for the stories we would need to identify the rules, the acceptance criteria that are setting the scope of the story. And for the rules, we would like to come up with a couple of examples that are explaining the rule. This we do during the discovery process, and then from the examples we make formulate the scenarios. So whenever we whenever we code the rule into the system, then we can make the scenario illustrating the rule, and on the other hand verifying the production code that we did. And yesterday I was showing you at least a highlight of a technique called example mapping, where you can have your rules and the related examples listed in a kind of two-dimensional map. And we said that the formulation typically looks like that you just pick the first example and try to formulate it to the scenario. So that's what we did. But at this point, I would like to again highlight, and this is what we will deal with a little bit more in detail, that the scenario itself alone, just like an example itself alone without the rule, is not necessarily understandable. I mean, you can understand this scenario, but without knowing which rule it is actually supporting, you will have some strange questions that we also mentioned yesterday. That is it important that I was asking a 3-word question? Does it have to be at least 3 words, or it was just an incidental detail here? And these questions can be answered if you are always considering the scenario or the example as the description of a particular rule. During the example mapping, this is easy because the examples are anyway put underneath the rules, so the connection is clear. But whenever we formulate these things into scenarios and put these scenarios into feature files, it makes sense to document the rule together with the scenario. Documenting the rule together with the scenario can be done in multiple different ways. In old times, we were just basically putting it into a comment, but nowadays we have a new keyword in the, well, this is already at least 3-year-old, a keyword in the Gherkin syntax, which is called a rule keyword. And basically this rule keyword can be used to document or group the scenarios that belong to a particular rule. So that's definitely something that I would like to highlight, that makes sense to definitely take care of documenting the rule together with the scenario. Otherwise, it will be much harder to understand what the scenario wanted to illustrate. So that's an important detail that I wanted to highlight. So, and basically with that, we just finished this first section, which was supposed to give you an introduction to formulation. So basically we have seen that that formulation is documenting the examples with the given, and then we are using the Gherkin format, which is a kind of standard or almost standard specification language used by many different tools, many different languages, and what we are formulating are the examples, but the examples are belonging to rules, and these connections should be kept. Otherwise, it will be much harder to get this traceability, much harder to understand what we wanted to say with that particular scenario. Okay, so that was basically the first part. Now, in this second part, I would like to talk about that aspect that I already mentioned for the BDD definition. So there we said that BDD is targeting business requirements, and unfortunately, it's easy to say that something is a business requirement, but there is no clear definition of what is a business requirement and what is not a business requirement. If you are trying to do that for your own project, maybe then it's easier because you know that what are those expectations that are coming from the business, that are coming from the product owner, and what are those expectations that are coming from different aspects of the code. Maybe instead of business requirement, we could also say functional requirement, which will be also considerably good definition for that, but. Yeah, so it's not always that easy. So with this section, I would like to think it together with you. What do we mean on a business requirement? So what are those things that are really describing the business expectations and not, for example, usability or other things? And I would like to do that in a way that I will show you 5 different rules in a rule card. And what you would need to do, you would need to tell me, and we will open up a poll, you would need to tell that whether you think this is considerably a business requirement or not a business requirement. So it's basically a yes/no question. There will be an I don't know answer as well, and just because there will be 5, so we will be short in time. I will just give you 20 seconds. Is this how much I gave last time? I think 20 seconds was a good one. Or maybe we will even decrease that. So you will have 20 seconds for each of the cards to answer that thing. Don't worry, there is no good or bad answer. This is basically just trying to involve you in the thinking, and let's see. Okay, so the first one is this one, and again, the question is always the same, and Andy will open up the poll in a second. So what do you think, what you see in this blue card, is this a business requirement or not? Or you are not sure? And the timer. So timer.
I have a timer.
Doesn't matter, I already have it. So 20 seconds.
We need more than 20 seconds, about only a third of people were able
Okay.
to answer within 20 seconds of I opened the poll.
Okay. So let's wait a little bit more.
So now we are at 72%.
Okay. Let's see. So most of you were saying that this is a business requirement, but 1/3 of you were saying no. And of course, that's also an understandable thing. So I would have said yes, and I will tell you why. So basically, the rule here says that the question with at least one common word should be suggested. This is an expectation. This is a generic business expectation, and it's not the way how you can really check whether something is a business requirement or not, but it's a good validation for that. That if you think about that, whether this particular requirement is related to one particular interface of your application, like the user interface, or not, and if not, then it's most probably a business expectation. So in our case, definitely this thing should be independent of whether we are trying to make a question on the user interface or maybe on the REST API. So that also an indicator that probably this was an expectation that was coming from the business. Okay, and that's so far so good. In this case, we will be able to formulate this an example for that scenario as a BDD scenario, for that rule as a BDD scenario. This is actually the scenario that you have seen already yesterday. So it says that another question contains the same word. Given there are questions asked as title, what is SpecFlow, what is Cucumber? So these are the two questions that we have already. And the user is authenticated. When the user starts asking the question as best SpecFlow practices, then the suggestion list should be what is SpecFlow with a single item. That's what together makes sense. Okay, so that was the first rule. Okay. Second rule. So when clicking the button above the vote number, the number in the vote box should increase. So what do you think? Is this a business requirement or not? And let me just increase it for 30 seconds. See? Five, four, three, two, one, and let's see the answers. So most of you were saying yes, but a little bit more than before were saying no. And that's a very good thing. I would have said no, and I will tell you why. Or let's be precise. I would say that this is not yet a business requirement. Maybe this is something that we hear from the product owner. So they want to have a button here that is green, but if we are just following that path and trying to implement that particular rule, then we will not really, probably not be able to find what was really needed. So definitely this one is specifying the expected user interface changes. So that's what they define, but they are actually missing what was the real meaning of that rule. So that you know that now there has to be a button created above the vote number, and if you are just clicking on that, then suddenly a number is increasing. But it's not really describing that actually that's the way how you can vote. So that it misses the really real domain activity that you would like to do that. So Sometimes UI specification might be required. So it can happen that your business is saying that yes, that we want to have a like button here, which is whatever thumbs up on the right hand side, but that's but it doesn't really make sense to specify that with behavior driven development, because then what you are trying to do, then you would try to describe the user interface details with text. This is not really matching to each other. So whenever we would like to verify the things with BDD, we should rather focus on the business requirements. So what the business meaning, what the intention of the business was with that particular function. And let's try to identify that first. And if we have identified that first, then we can find how to write better scenarios for that. So in this case, if I would get this rule from the product owner, I would start to ask this why questions. That okay, but why do you want to have that button there? Oh, because users want to vote, or I don't know, vote up and down. And with a little bit of discussion with them, we can basically finalize or just figure out what was the original intention, what was the real business meaning of that particular rule, and then probably rewrite it like that so users can vote up and down questions. That's what we wanted to say. And everything else that was described is basically the user interface details. Maybe that user interface details are valid today for our web application, but maybe on our mobile application that we will release tomorrow, this is anyway going to be different because there will be no up and down buttons, but maybe you will be able to slide left and right to be able to vote up and down. So don't get locked into the user interface details, but always try to figure out what those user interface details, if you have received them as a specification, were about, what is the real meaning behind them, and try to identify that real meaning first, and then it is going to be easier to make scenarios for that. So once I have figured out that the real rule was that the users can vote up and down question, then for that we can make multiple scenarios. Maybe one of the scenario would look like this. The user votes up a question. Given there's a question asked with 2 votes and the user is authenticated, when the user votes up the question, then the vote count of the question should be changed to 3. And that's what we really wanted to see from the business perspective. Of course, probably there are a couple of other examples as well. What happens if it was 0 and you are down voting that? What happens if the same user trying to vote twice? Those are the details that you will probably come up with other scenarios as well, but at least one scenario might look like that. Okay, so that's what you would like to see. Okay, let's see a third one. So now we have seen 2. One was more business, describing the business intention. The other was describing the user interface, and we had to work extra to be able to find the real business meaning behind them. So let's see the next one. So the latest 10 questions should be shown on the home page. What do you think? Is this a business requirement or not? With that meaning that we have seen so far. Okay, hopefully you got your answers. Let's see. So most of the people were saying yes, and I can agree to that. So this is a business requirement. I wanted to make this a little bit tricky because I was using the word page and show to that. But just because you see a verse like page or show, that doesn't necessarily mean that you are referring to the user interface details. So a page is not only a user interface detail, the page is also a business concept. So that a page is basically a group of details that you would like to present at the same time, and presenting or showing, that's absolutely a valid business term in your application as well. And probably this is not even a usability requirement. we were not only limiting the latest questions on the home page to 10 because otherwise the page would be too long, but maybe we have some security reason or maybe some other reasons why we did that way. So probably that was a business decision in this application. Of course, this is an imagined application and we are not working with this application. So all of these things are only assumptions. And of course, you would need to think about those assumptions in your own application as well. But these are the things that you should always consider, so that is that information is a business decision, you would like to confirm it by the product owner in the role of a product owner, or you just need to find a nice color for that button and the product owner happened to say yellow, but it's not, he was not saying yellow because he's the product owner, but he's having better senses of the color, then probably that's not a business requirement. Or maybe he wanted to highlight something with a yellow color, so that should be a warning, and maybe then we should figure out what is that. Okay, so we can make scenarios obviously for that one as well. Just to give you some examples, so the latest question is shown on the homepage with details. Given there is a question asked as how to write better scenarios, 0 votes, 1 views. Ford was asking that, and whenever the user checks the homepage, then the question should be listed among the latest questions as above. So that's it, and this is when you are asking, then it immediately appears. And the other one is related to that. The latest 10 questions are shown on the homepage. Given there are 12 questions asked and the user checks the homepage, then the homepage should contain the 10 latest questions ordered. That's what we want to see there. Okay, so that's how we could make scenarios that are illustrating, that are describing those particular rules. Okay, let's make the next one. The content is mandatory when answering questions. It's a validation related thing. Okay, let's see. Oops. Okay, so 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Let's see. Most of the people were saying yes, and I absolutely agree to them. So this is a yes. I wanted to include this example though, and I was writing this but inside, and maybe in the Q&A you can even argue to that. But so I was saying that the validation rules are business requirements. That's clear. However, the validation is a little bit tricky because of multiple different reasons. One reason is that usually validation has to be implemented in multiple parts of the application, so it's not so easy to check it only at the back end, because the validation is typically also done in the front end, and it's hard to really phrase that. I was saying it, as you see, in a way that that typically to be able to implement a mandatory validation rule, you don't have to write new code statements, let's say it like that. So to be able to make a field mandatory, if your system is properly prepared for validation rules, typically you just need to mark that field. It's a kind of declarative thing. So you have to put a mandatory attribute on the field or something like that. And because of that, so because of these two reasons, even though that validation is definitely a business rule and you can do BDD scenarios for validation, typically what I suggest is that whenever you think about a user story and whenever that user story involves some input interface, like for example, the registration or whatever, don't start with the validation rules. Validation rules can be expressed with BDD scenarios, but typically there are quite many of them, and the value of those scenarios, because the implementation is anyway so simple of just putting a single attribute on that, is not that high. So typically what I suggest is, so I've seen it many times that teams are just starting to work with BDD, take the first scenario or first story. The first story has some input form, and they just try to cover all the different validation rules. And suddenly they have already 50 different scenarios with the tricky combinations of the different validation rules. They are already too tired of writing so many scenarios. They have to maintain so many scenarios. And at the end, the developers are saying that, well, while you were doing these 50 scenarios, we have already done that 3 markers that was necessary. And anyway, the rest was handled by the validation framework. We didn't even have to do anything with that. So what I want to say with that, and I don't know how much is going through that, don't start with the validation rules. Maybe that's the proper phrasing. Try to think about the other more exciting business rules first. Try to find some scenarios for that. And if you still have some time, and if you still feel the need to have some validation related scenarios, of course you can make a couple of them, but yeah, just don't get lost in the validation rules, because because of the high number of combinations and because of the complexity of the verification, you can really get lost pretty easily. And this is an example of a scenario made for that validation rule. Cannot post an answer with an empty content, given there is a question asked and the user is authenticated. When a user attempts to answer the question as content with empty, then the answer attempt should fail with the error content cannot be empty. As you can see, this is all fine, but now you see that if you would have 50 different fields, then all the combinations and all the mandatory, not mandatory, whatever validation rules would really fill up your feature files very quickly. There are similar topics than that. What I typically run into that is maybe paging and such kind of things that are anyway very common. You don't really need to work on having the list paged. Probably you anyway have an infrastructure for doing that. Creating and paging can also involve a lot of different cases. So what happens if, what happens that. So just for a single paged list, it would be very easy to create 5-6 scenarios immediately. And what you get at the end, you get basically testing the thing that was anyway done by the infrastructure. Okay, so that's why I wanted to highlight that. I hope it was somehow getting through. Happy to get more into the details in the Q&A if you will have some related questions to that. Okay, so, and with that, let's go to the last one. The last one is that, so the API/questions post request should provide 401 result if the user is not authenticated. Let's see, is this a rule or not? Did you open the poll, Andy? Or I just don't see it. Yes. Okay. So this is the last one that we discuss. Five, 4, 3, 2, 1, 0. Let's see. Okay, so now it's, I think the no is a little bit higher, but also the yes is very high. So actually that was a tricky question because it depends. So we cannot really answer that question without knowing more about the application. I think from seeing it from that perspective, all of you were right. So the ones who were saying that it's not a business requirement, probably they were saying that because it suffers from the same issue that we had with the user interface related scenario. It is describing some endpoints, some HTTP status codes, but we don't know what is the business rule behind that. So therefore, this is not a business rule. That would be absolutely right. And maybe the ones who were saying yes, they were saying that it's yes, because maybe in this application, we have a public API that is used by a certain set of users who are just integrating with our product. Let's imagine that you are working on Twitter. Twitter provides an API, the Twitter API. And if I'm a developer and I would like to use Twitter, but not through the user interface, but through the public API, then I would need to learn how the public API behaves. And for that, those kind of business rules, which are again business decisions, targeted business decisions, has to be made, and we have to design our interface. It's not anymore our private property of what kind of return code we do. It's part of our public API. So that's how we can say. So if it's a public API, then probably this is yes. Even though that in that case it would be a yes, and the scenarios that we would write would be valid BDD scenarios. So that's a BDD scenario that is describing the behavior of a public web API or public REST API. And as you see here in the scenario, we see JSON snippets, we see status codes and such kind of things that you normally don't see in a scenario, because normally your business that you would like to discuss don't understand status codes and JSON snippets. But in this case, this is some sort of targeted scenario. It's targeting for one particular user group, where the user group is also developers, external developers who would like to integrate with our system. So for them, this scenario is absolutely readable, and this is their business language, and therefore that can be valid. In that case, probably it would make sense to highlight that this is targeting a special user group. As you can see right now, what I did, I just made an API tag on that so that I can better separate, or I don't mix it up. That this is not the set of scenarios that are describing the business the business rule behavior, but this is the ones that are describing how our public API behaves. So that's the kind of things. Okay, so basically with this exercise, with this interactive exercise, I wanted to, and again, you have seen there are no clear yes and no answers for many of the cases. In many cases, it depends. But this is the way of thinking that you should also try to follow when you say. So if it's describing some technical details, some user interface, then try to always ask behind what was the intention behind that. And always try to put it into a scale that how much this is an exciting detail where we really have to work extra, where it's really special to this application, it's really special to this domain, or how much this is a commodity that we have in every single application, like a mandatory validation, and we are anyway having quite much perfectionism for that, or a paging of list. Then probably we should rather focus our efforts to the more specific business details. And sometimes our target user is not a homogeneous set of users, but we have some targeted scenarios that are targeting a specific user set. So again, so that's what I wanted to say with that thing. Whenever you start thinking in formulation, always try to make clear first what is your business rule. With an unclear business rule, it will be very hard to make a good scenario. You will see it also later on when we'll do our scenario rewriting thing. Okay, but now we are at the good half of our session. So now we will have the quiz just like yesterday.
Oh.
And
give me a moment. Full screen. Yes. So, as yesterday, get your phone. Guidelines the same. 5 questions in total. The faster you answer, more points you get. Again,
except if you are answering wrong.
Yes. The answer has to be right. It's profanity filter on the names, and yeah, best supported in Chrome. Good. Next slide. So, winner will win again an Amazon voucher. We'll send them out to them, and here are the QR code and the code for menti.com to join.
Yeah, whichever you want to use.
Again, on this one screen, you don't see how many people are in it.
Just trying to make you harder to decide when to move on, right? So,
yes.
give them some time.
We need some waiting music for tomorrow.
Yeah. I'm so bad in picking up good music, so that you probably don't want me to suggest. Maybe if someone from the audience has a good suggestion for waiting music, then share the link afterwards. Okay, so we have
78 now.
Very good.
So let's start. How many people contributed to the core SpecFlow project until June 2022?
Yeah, I mentioned this number, so hopefully you remember. And it's not 950, but
it would be
186.
wonderful.
Yes. You can be the next one. Definitely.
Yep. So if you get it to the next masterclass to 950, that would be awesome.
Yeah. Actually, then if we will get there, maybe we will do double the Amazon voucher. No.
Personally doubling that. So question 2. Which of the following activities are not usually done as part of the formulation practice?
Ooh, you have to read fast. Yes, sorry for that.
I don't try to read the answers out.
Yeah, for that, unfortunately, Mentee's timer thing. Yes, find edge cases is typically a test designed to practice, and hopefully, and in PDD we did that. If the edge case was important for the business, then we did that during the discovery. Yeah, most of you got it right. Perfect.
So now let's have a. The leaderboard is changing a lot.
A lot of animation, and Chris is in the top. Who was the fastest? So that's good.
So question 3. Which of the following keywords are a valid synonym of scenario in the default English keyword set? Test case, example, business need, behavior.
We haven't mentioned that, so you would need to think about what is related to scenarios. And we mentioned that examples are lightweight form of a scenario, so you can even use the example keyword in English. Yeah, very good. Most of you got it right.
Yeah.
Things changed. Oli is at the top. Let's see.
4 or 5. Who introduced the given when then keywords to BDD? Chris Metz, Dan North, Aslak Helsoy, Matt Wynn.
Okay. So Dan North was introducing BDD. Aslak Helsoy is the creator of Cucumber. Matt Wynn was doing example mapping, but the given when then was introduced by Chris Metz. So if you happen to see him in London, then say hello to him and congratulate him to these nice keywords. He's a good speaker, so if you see him talking in a conference, then definitely makes sense to attend.
First time that the first place didn't change. Ollie is still the fastest.
Yeah.
So now the pressure is on you, Ollie, on the last question.
Yeah.
Which of the following is part of the brief principles for good scenarios? Boring random data, encouraging intentional revealing, free of buzzwords.
So brief is an acronym, and one of these are really there. The question, which one? Yeah, intention revealing. But on the other hand, free of buzzwords would be also not bad, I think. But intention revealing is the one that we, and Oli was answering that right. So that's very nice.
Congratulations.
Congratulations. Yeah.
Ollie, please reach out to me at info@specflow.org. I added, wrote it in the chat, and we will look that you will get your Amazon voucher. And if you could add the Amazon store where you're normally buying, that would help us a lot.
Yeah, that's a good time, because otherwise you will get it to Amazon Australia, and it will be a quite long time until you get your goods, and quite costly.
And all of the voucher is consumed by postal service.
Yeah. Okay, so thank you very much for participating in the quiz. And now, just like yesterday, we will have a short break, just 5 minutes. Take that time to refresh yourself, jump, run around, and come back. We will come. You were able to refresh yourself, and let's move on with our masterclass lesson. So you remember that when I was presenting the agenda, you have seen that there are quite many points. So that actually to progress better with these points, I merged 2 points into one. Maybe not the best technique, but right now you will see it will work. So in the next topic, I would like to a little bit talk about that thing that we already highlighted yesterday, that formulation is not test transcribing. And we wanted to learn about these brief principles, these golden rules of formulation. And I thought that it's much easier to learn about these golden rules through a concrete example. So that's why I just basically joined these 2 topics into the same part. And this slide is from yesterday, where I was talking about the comparison between BDD and manual regression testing. And basically there we have listed the similarities and the differences. And for the similarities, it looked like that both of them are doing functional checks and both of them are scripted in some way. But we also learned that there are very core differences as well. And I think those core differences are basically rooting from this cost factor. That's what I highlighted yesterday. So try to think about that. What is the most costly in a manual regression testing, and what is the most costly for an automated BDD scenario? And then you will see that for manual regression testing, the human execution costs are the most important, and therefore it makes sense to make a process which is optimized for that. This means that you probably you will test a longer user journey, and you will check as many things as possible through the way. However, for automated BDD scenarios, the maintenance cost is the most important. So there it makes sense to make a robust, predictable, not brittle, easy to maintain scenarios or tests, which naturally means that they will basically much more focused on a single thing. And because of these key differences, it is typically not a good option to just take your manual test scripts or existing long test scripts and just one-to-one convert that to scenario. Even though that this would be a promising thing, but at the end it never works out well. So definitely think twice. To illustrate that, I was trying to come up with a test script. This is a test script. You shouldn't try to read. So I think what is immediately visible from that it's far too long, and obviously it contains a lot of details and technical details for that. Right now, this thing, I don't call it really scenario, this test is using the give and then keywords and the end keyword. So it looks like that it's formally looks like a scenario, looks like a BDD scenario, but from the meaning point of view, or from the BDD concept point of view, this is basically a test script that is just using SpecFlow to be able to execute that particular script. The problem is that we would like to document the requirements with these scenarios, because we would like to get feedback about these scenarios from the business. feedback when we are creating them, but also feedback later on when maybe there is a change in the application and we would like to validate whether this particular scenario still makes sense, or with this newest change we need to revisit that. So those kind of things. The scenario should always be somewhat in a readable stage. And unfortunately, just if you are just transcribing a test script to this kind of scenario that you have seen, is not really helping, so that no one will be able to give meaningful feedback for that particular thing, that scenario thing that you did. So what I would like to do now, that I would like to try to fix that particular scenario, or fix that particular test, and try to apply these different golden rules of scenario writing, that and see how by applying those principles or rules for that, whether we can make it better, and how. So these golden rules of good scenario writing principles have been existing for many years. So I'm basically every BDD practitioner team had their own list of things that to remember when writing good scenarios. So there has been a couple of lists around for a long time. But when we worked with on the formulation book with Sebros, then we thought that, okay, let's try to consolidate these lists. So we were asking our friends and other people, BDD practitioners, to share their lists, and we were watching a couple of presentations related to that. And we wanted to make a kind of consolidated list of them. And when we were doing that, we got to this list of 5-6 principles. Then we thought, as someone was suggesting us, that we should maybe rephrase them in a way that it should be easier to remember. And this is how we got to this brief, actually it's a mnemonic, that is just listing the initials of or making the initials of these principles better rememberable. And this is how we got to these particular names for the principles. As I said, so the principles existed maybe under a different name. So business language, real data, intention revealing, that was the quiz question, essential and focused. And the briefness is also a useful principle, so that there are altogether 6 of them. Okay, so that's what we are going to look at. So we will learn about these principles by applying these principles to this long test script, and let's see how we could make that better with that. Okay, and whenever we do that, in the bottom right corner of the slide, you will also see which principle we are currently applying, so that right now you see the letter B. So this means that the first principle that we are trying to apply for this test script is the business language. So if you look at the language of this scenario or this test, then you can see that basically it's describing the thing using user interface terminology or browser automation terminology. You can check up the verbs. It says navigate, click, wait, type, and such kind of things. These are basically browser automation or browser interaction terms. Definitely, this is not our business term. So our business is not about implementing browsers or not about implementing browser automation tools, but we are making a website where people can ask questions, answer them, vote them. So our terminology contains these things like question, answer, vote, up, down, and such kind of things. But definitely not these things. Unfortunately, once you have described your test in this low-level technical terminology, it's not so easy to figure out what the related business steps were sounding like. And typically, it's not a one thing. So you cannot just point to a single step and try to convert back to business language. But typically, a group of steps can be considered or has to be considered together. And then you can probably find some business meaning for that. So this is what we will need to do. It's not an easy job. So definitely it needs some time, and probably you also need to talk with the product owner, talk with the business analysts as well to be able to help you. So I will just show you a few examples. I will not go through the entire test for that. So let's say that we just identify these first two steps. So the given I navigate to la 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 la, and I wait until the home page, home becomes visible. And actually what we wanted to say with the business terminology is that I'm checking the home page. That's what was basically coded down into that way, right? Checking the home page. We said that home page is not necessarily a UI term. That would also make sense in a mobile app as well. But that's how it was translated to these low level things. Okay, then we can move forward. Then we have a then step. Browser title is Stack Overflow Home. It's hard to say what we really wanted to say with that, because I'm pretty sure that we didn't want to describe the browser title itself. That's just a technical detail. But probably what we wanted to say that the title of this page is Stack Overflow Home. Maybe this is just a guess, but maybe it's a good guess. So we can move on. Then we probably have a bunch of questions now, a bunch of steps. I have even removed majority of them because otherwise this test wouldn't fit into my screen. So after this clicking on login, just imagine that it's entering the username and password as well. So basically a bigger block of steps which is related to login. Probably what we wanted to say with that is that given I have logged in, right? That's why we were going to the login page. That's why we entered our username and password. That's why we were waiting until we finally logged in. That's what we wanted to say, given I have logged in. Okay, then let's move on. I just move that one to the top so that we have more space. So again, we have a big bunch of steps. So let's just very, very briefly look through that so that we are looking, it looks like that we are clicking on this ask a question button, some waiting, then we are entering some text into this, into one of the text box, and entering some details to another text box, entering some other details into a third text box, and then we are clicking on some button and again some waiting. So if you just consider this and think about what we really wanted to do with that, then probably after a little bit of thinking, we realize that actually what these many steps are here saying that, hey, the only thing we wanted to do, we wanted to ask a new question with these details, where the title should be this, the body should be that, the tags should be that one. Okay, so that's how we represented it with low-level browser interaction steps. But actually, from the business perspective, this is what we did. And of course, we could move forward. I will not do that first. I'm just saying that suddenly I did all of these things. So now I have replaced our tests with one that is containing the same things, but now it is describing it with the business terminology. You don't need to go through that. Basically, you have seen the beginning of that to be done together. Obviously, this is much better. So as you can see, my font size I was able to increase my font size. So that means that the test is much shorter, but it's definitely not good enough yet. So we will move forward. And the next principle that we would like to highlight is the focus principle. Actually, what we would like to do, we would like to figure out that what were those business rules that were verified by this test. Okay, you remember what we discussed yesterday, or not only yesterday, but also today earlier, that for every scenario, there has to be a business rule which is illustrated by that. Unfortunately, the one who was writing this test forgot to document what the business rules are that were checked by this. So now we would need to figure that out in a kind of reverse engineering way. That's what we do. Typically, if you are thinking about what is the business rule that we are verifying, then the good thing is to look at the then steps, because the then steps are basically verifying the expectations. So the then steps are the ones that are checking whether something was done in the right way. So usually the then steps should somehow making the connection of the scenario to the expectations of the business rule. And as you can see in this case, we have a lot of then steps. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 then steps. They are not even only at the end of this scenario, but somewhere also in the middle. So basically what we got here is some sort of multi-rule, multi-purpose scenario. So as we have multiple dance steps, that means that probably this is not illustrating a single business rule, but it's verifying multiple business rules at the same time. Again, for manual testing process, that's not bad because there you are optimizing for the human execution time. But now for this kind of automated scenario, the maintainability of that kind of scenarios will be much, much harder. So instead of having such a big multi-purpose, multi-rule scenario, we should have multiple smaller focus scenarios. So that's what we would like to do. So actually what we would need to do to be able to achieve that is basically to split this test into multiple scenarios. And basically the dance steps will be our guidance for that, so that we should focus on the dance steps and try to figure out, try to split the scenario based on that. So let's just look at a few. Let's just look at the first one. So that the first one is checking whether the title should be Spec Overflow Home. What the original business rule was for that, that's a good question, but probably with the help of the business, probably we identified, now I was just simplifying that I was using the scenario title as the rule. So that the application homepage is identifiable. Probably this is why this was so important for us to check that the home, that the title is this and that. Maybe this was, maybe this wasn't, but at least we have identified this first thing. Now, if we would like to look at the second thing, so now what you see is that we are checking the home. Yeah, that's where we are logging in, asking a question, and then we are verifying whether the home page is activated. We are again back at the home page, and the question appears at the end of the list. So probably the business rule that is described here was that a new question should be added to the question list, so that whenever I'm asking a new question, then basically it should appear in the question list immediately or something like that. So basically that's how I identified this second scenario for this case. Given I have logged in, I ask a new question with these details, then the question should appear with the today's date, whatever, in the list. So that's what I have identified. And now we can move forward. Now, as you see, the rest of that, I was saying that we should navigate to the question details of the home page of this question, and then something should be visible. So again, this then step is assuming that a question has been asked already earlier, but now as we separated that, we have to state that explicitly. So again, we would need to identify the rule. Probably the rule is that that the details of the question can be accessed from the question list or something like that. And whatever was the outcome of the previous scenario now becomes the context, the given steps of the next scenario. So now you can see, given I have logged in, I have added the question with da, 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 da. When I navigate to the question details, then this is what I should see. Okay, and move on. So we're focusing on the first three group of dance steps, but obviously we will need to go for further and check other things as well. So basically, in this process of applying the focus principle, we were trying to think about what is the business rule that the particular dance steps are verifying, what are the required dependencies or required conditions or context that is necessary to be able to check that dance step, and try to document somehow the rule as well. Right now, I'm just using the rule as the scenario name, but obviously later on I could express it in a rule keyword, and I can have multiple scenarios for the same rule as well. Okay, so I don't know how you like the progress. Definitely this thing looks much better than it was before. I think it's almost good, but still we can improve that, and we have a couple of further principles that we need to focus on next. So the next principle is this what we were calling intention revealing, and that's a tricky one because especially if you are thinking, if you're coming from a classic test scripting thing where you are just moving step after step after step after step, then everything looks like an action. So that I'm logging in, I'm asking a question, I'm opening the home page, I'm going to the details, or whatever. However, So basically these scenarios or these steps that we have in these scenarios are describing the mechanical steps that we would need to do. Just to give you some highlights of these examples. So this one is describing the mechanical step. How do I ensure that the user is logged in? I have to log in. And this one is describing how do I ensure that I have a question? I have to log in and I have to add a question to that. But from the automation perspective as well, and from the understandability perspective, it's better to move away from the how did we achieve that, so the mechanical details, mechanical steps, to the what do we want to expect, so what we wanted to achieve. So what is the intention that we wanted to highlight here? And this is what uh, we can phrase. For these examples, the difference will be not that will be only a subtle or just a small little detail. It looks like, but in other applications, this can be really having a big impact. So that look at this, compare these two things. So these were the two steps that we had so far. To be able to ensure that we have a question, we had to log in and we had to add a question with these details. And now we have rephrased these two steps into a single step in this case, which is describing the intention. Our intention was that there should be a question added with. We don't care how it was added, whether it was added yesterday or whether it was added today, whether it was added through the API or whether the user was logging in and adding it manually. We don't care. The only thing that we take care of, at least in this scenario, is the question should be there. And especially if you are more related to the automation things, then you see that automating the second one is opening up much more options. So maybe if you have a testing backdoor to that you can import questions, then that can be used for this one. While for the other one, you are forcing yourself to go through these mechanical steps and always replay them, which makes the test less robust and definitely slower. So that's maybe a good example of how this intention revealing thing can be imagined. Another example here, which is maybe not that clear, is that we had a step like given I have logged in. Again, this is telling what I did and not what I wanted to have. So instead of that, I could have said that given the user has been authenticated, and we don't care how they did it, but we just care about the result. That could be one option to make that more intention revealing. Now, in this case, just to give you another example of another way, I was just turning this expectation that we have an authenticated user into a tag, so that instead of explicitly saying that given the user have logged in, I will just mark the scenario with the authenticated, and in the automation code base, I basically make sure that whenever a scenario is tagged with the authenticated, then I somehow make sure that the user has been available, or user login session is available for that. Okay, so that's now we applied the intention revealing things, and again now the things become a little bit more small. But we have the essential principle as well. And the essential principle is trying to get rid of the unnecessary or intentional details or accidental details from the scenario. So look at this scenario. Look at the then step. So the last step is checking whether we have a question with a particular title and the views and the votes. So what we have specified as body or what we have specified as tags is absolutely not interesting here. We have to specify something because these are mandatory fields, but we don't really care what we what we have used. We should use some body and we should use some tags, but what are the exact tags are not important for this scenario. And it's even worse. It's not actually not important. Normally you would think that more details are causing more clarity, but actually it's the opposite. So if you have more unnecessary or unimportant details, then this is causing confusion. And of course, it also makes the maintainability harder. So if someone looks at this scenario, then they are asking that, why was it important that it has a BDD tag? So does this behavior only works for questions with a BDD tag, or why was it important there? So this is the kind of confusion that can happen for that. If I'm just concentrating to the relevant details, in this case is the title, then basically all these things could be formulated into a much nicer sentence saying that when I ask a new question, test question 1, 2, 3, then this and this happens. So now the thing is more containing really essential details. So the last one, which is not so well visible in this particular example, is the real data. So as you can see now, this scenario is pretty complete. However, if you look at the question that was asked, then definitely this is not a realistic question. These are not the kind of questions that the users are asking. And we could consider some other way. Maybe we could think about what questions the users really ask. And in some cases, somehow using realistic data and real data for that makes the scenarios better readable, or they can better start off a discussion. Should we have the question mark at the end of all of the questions or not? Or so many things that is important. Of course, this is not a black and white thing, so that that there is always a kind of a room for changes, how much abstract and how much concrete you are phrasing your scenario. But it makes sense to consider that, and it makes sense to experience or experiment with some details and see how this could be done. So now applying the real data principle, these are the scenarios that we finally got. And the good news is that finally, without too much extra work, we also got our scenarios brief, which means that they are small and concise. So now it should be much easier to get feedback from the business to them. So that was basically the 6 brief principles that we have seen. So business language, real data, intention revealing, essential, focused, and brief. And that's what you should also consider whenever you write new scenarios, or if you are in this unlucky situation that you need to clean up such an old test script and try to identify the business meanings and the scenario details. Okay, so that's basically covers this thing. So basically we have 2 topics left, but both of them are slightly shorter, so don't worry, hopefully we'll have some time for questions as well. The next one I wanted to dedicate for the automation, because at the end these scenarios are becoming automated tests. So probably many of you are already thinking about that. Okay, that's nice that we have these brief scenarios and we are using the business language, but why don't we discuss about how we are going to automate them? So does the automation matter? And for that, I just listed 3 typical questions that I often get, or that probably everyone is sooner or later encountering related to that. So does it matter how I'm going to automate that? Should I reuse a step, an existing step, or create a new one? Or if I have applied the essential principle, then how will I know what data was used for testing? So these are the questions that I would like to address in this section. So the first one is that was this one. So that you see a scenario, you see it's written in some sort of business language, and as you can see, it's not possible to view from that how it is going to be automated. So this scenario can be automated through the user interface by just clicking on the Vote Up button. It could be probably automated on the API level, and probably some other levels as well of the application. You see here on the slides a couple of examples through the user interface, through the web APIs, through some service layer, through the application domain. Maybe some parts we are stubbing, maybe some parts we are mocking. We don't know that actually by looking at this scenario. Is this a problem? So is this a problem that we don't know that? And is this a problem that the scenario itself does not tell how it is going to be automated? And I think the decision how you are going to automate this is important for the entire team. It is important for the product owner, because the product owner needs to know that if, for example, if the product owner knows that this is automated on the API level, then of course it can happen that the UI, even though that this test is green, the UI can be still crashing, or anyway, so that they can only judge the passing or failing results by knowing what was in what level we have really tested this business rule. And obviously the team also needs to know, because the team is creating multiple different tests, additional tests, and if they know that this is tested through the UI, then probably we don't need extra UI tests. But if we know that this was tested on the API level, we know that we have to make some at least some smoke tests for the UI to be able to ensure that the UI is also not broken. So this is an important decision, but uh, but 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 even though that it is important, it's not important to be able to decide what to do. And if the scenario is specifying the expectations, then the expectations are anyway the same. So that we should, I mean, on the formulation phase, we should really focus on what we want. That's the specification, and how we are going to verify that. That's maybe something that we can decide later, or we can find by discussing it with the team what is the best option to automate this particular scenario. Definitely, if you have made the decision at the end, you can document this decision maybe with a tag. So putting a web API tag on a scenario, highlighting that this particular scenario is automated through the web API is absolutely fine. It's not breaking the readability. The scenario is still describing the same, but if somebody is interested in this detail, then they can always get that detail. So that's how it is. So we would like to focus on the specification, and the automation strategy that we choose is a secondary. It's something that we can later decide and maybe just document at a later stage. So it's a kind of funny. I'm calling it this formulation automation paradox. That so you have to ignore, you should ignore the automation while you are thinking in the specification. And actually, if you do that, it will be easier to automate later. When you were thinking about this intention revealing example that I provided, that I showed you in the previous block, then that's clear. So that if you are focusing on intentions, it's much easier to find the best automation level. So that was question number one. Question number two was whether, if we have already existing steps automated, whether when we are making a new scenario, how much we should stick to the already automated steps. So let's just look at this this left-hand side thing, and let's imagine that because of some previous scenarios, we already have a step saying, given there are questions asked as, and we have to specify their title. And now we are talking about this scenario that we mentioned earlier, that the latest 10 questions should be shown on the home page. Obviously, I can reuse the existing step, and I can reuse this there are questions asked as a step to be able to generate 10 questions. Now you can see that I was having a hard time to generate 10 different questions, but the scenario will work. However, if we are introducing a new step, like that there are a number of questions asked, then the scenario would look much nicer and much better come to the point. So don't get it wrong. The reusing step is one of the greatest features of Cucumber and SpecFlow, so that's all good. But but it's not only useful for automation efficiency, but also language consistency. And generally, language consistency is a very important concern if you are thinking about business readability. But don't overrate reusability. I have seen that many times, and this was always causing a problem, that people are too much focusing on reusing existing steps, even if the readability was hurt. So I would say that reusability is great, but readability is even more great. So that that definitely you should focus on that if possible. And actually, if you have a nice structure, then having this additional step definition introduced for this step is anyway just 3 lines or 4 lines altogether. So it's not really making your code much bigger, and maybe you will be able to use these things anyway later on. So focus on the consistency and not so much on the reusability. And the third question that I wanted to address is that which people say, and this is absolutely valid, so that if I say that that I don't show the details, so I'm just saying, given there is question asked with 2 votes and the user is authenticated and whatever, but just by saying user is authenticated, we don't know what the user details were, or we don't know what the question details were, even though that we could specify them with all the details. So that the first one is describing all the details: the question title, the question body, the votes, the Marvin, the password for that particular user, and we said that this first one is including a lot of unnecessary detail. For this particular scenario, we don't want to, we are not caring about the title. However, for diagnosis purposes, or you want to debug the scenario, then this can be an important detail. So these details are necessary and important to automate, but definitely we don't want to keep them in the scenario, but we want to push them down to the automation layer. In the automation layer, I can introduce constants, I can use reusable methods that are creating default questions or default users or something like that. And if the diagnosis or the debugging of the test is your concern, then this can be nicely solved with logging. Tomorrow I will going to show you that this particular application is not only performing the different actions for these steps, but it's always logging out what concrete details were used. So if you are just running this second scenario, in the output of the log, you will see that this was the particular title of the question. It was asked by this particular user. Whenever you say that and the user is authenticated, it says that which was the username that was used, which was the password, so that all the details are provided in the test log, but you don't have to maintain that in the scenario text. So that whenever you are thinking about how these details are valuable or not, we are not hiding these details. We are just pushing them down to the automation details or the automation code, and maybe we can use that in logging. So basically that's, I mean, these are the probably the 3 most important things that is related to formulation and how the particular scenarios are going to be automated. I wanted to highlight these things. So generally it makes sense to formulate the scenarios in an automation agnostic way. You should focus on the language consistency. Step reusability will anyway come, and generally hide incidentals, show real data only, and these details can be logged. So if the diagnosis is a concern, then this is something that we can do. Okay. So next, I would like to say a few words about data-driven scenarios that are expressed as scenario outlines. So far, the scenarios that you have seen were really describing some sort of workflow. The user was doing that, and then this was the result. But not all of the problems are like that. Some problems, for example, this shipping cost calculation, is more like if you are describing it in a scenario, then the workflow is actually minimal. But the interesting thing is in this input-output pairs, so that in this case, how many books I sent in which region, and then checking the output count. And of course, I could create many scenarios that are checking that, but that would be just a copy paste with some different data. That would not be really useful. Fortunately, in Gherkin, we have a scenario outline that is supporting us with that. But before showing the scenario outline, let's just go back in time. Just think about it. How did we discuss this rule when we did the discovery? In the discovery, probably we were coming up with examples. But since in this case the examples are important input-output pairs, probably what we would do in this green example card, we would just basically make a table of a few useful examples, some input-output pairs like that. That's a good overview of some illustrative examples for this particular rule. And the good news is that the Gherkin scenario outline construct is basically keeping the same style of information. So what you can see, this is a scenario outline that you can see on the screen. So basically what you can see is that that it somehow keeps in this examples block below, it keeps this table that we were using as a discussion. So every time when I'm coming back to this scenario, I can immediately have a look at this examples table and then quickly understand the different variation things that I wanna have here. And to be able to turn these examples into a test, we need the scenario outline, which is essentially a template where different placeholders are used in the given when then steps. And basically what SpecFlow is doing for every single line in the examples block, it just generates a new test by replacing the placeholder with the value from the table. These three values, so the books, region, and cost, would be just enough. In our case, I also have a description column just to document that particular case, so that whenever I come back to this scenario outline later on, it should be easier for me to understand why this particular thing was important for me. Okay, with scenario outlines, it's very easy to generate more tests, but never forget that examples or tests are not for free. So if you are just generating a couple of more tests just because, why not test it for some different combinations or of that, think about that. This is generating extra cost of maintenance later on if you need to come back to this scenario, if you need to figure out why this scenario was important. So definitely, and also the description column can help you. It forces you to think about what was the purpose of that particular thing that you have used there. Okay. So, so this is about the scenario outlines, which is basically to be able to formulate data-driven problems. And basically, the last section for today is just three few things that I wanted to mention, which is increasing, or not necessarily, but trying to increase the readability. The first one is the tagging. You have seen a couple of examples now for the tagging. Tagging is basically just a simple labeling for the scenario. You can use tags for different purposes. So you can just select a subset of the scenario, maybe only the fast ones, or you can use them for creating some targeted reports for the different areas, like the pricing related scenarios. You can document that you need some external system. You can also use that to document how far you are with the scenario implementation process. We talked about that yesterday. You can also use the text to link to some Jira tickets, something like that. And you can also use that to document the automation concern. You have seen also an examples for that. Tags are also documentation, so it makes sense to make them readable, and makes sense to document them. We'll come back to that topic a little bit on Thursday as well. So tagging is generally can help you to make the scenarios better understandable. The second thing is, again, just a small thing, that after this feature book and before the first scenario, basically you have a free text zone that you can provide some additional useful information about the feature. It's a kind of markdown syntax. So, for example, you can also include pictures as well, and some of the reporting tools can process that and can really show you the real image and not just the reference to the image name. Again, it makes sense to be careful with that, because whatever you write into the free text zone, obviously this is not validated. So you have to take care it doesn't become obsolete. But otherwise, this is a useful thing to document some additional thing. And the last thing that I wanted to mention is the so-called background section. With the background section, you can basically avoid duplicating the same context statements within the same file. So that if all of the scenarios within the same file require you an authenticated user. And normally that means that every scenario should start it given the user is authenticated, given the user is authenticated, given the user is authenticated. Actually, with the background, you can just basically extract it to a kind of common context, and then you don't have to repeat that. Technically, SpecFlow will repeat that for every single scenario. So for every single scenario, SpecFlow will run this particular step, and only then it will move on to the first step of the scenario. But at least in the feature file is you don't have to have this application. But I think by default this looks like a good thing, so that you can reuse the application of the code. On the other hand, it somewhat breaks the readability, especially just imagine if you have a longer file and just look at the last scenario, you don't really understand that how can this scenario work without a logged user, and then you just forget that you have to scroll up and down to be able to see all the background steps. So whenever you use the background, be careful with that. Make sure that that you are only using it in the cases where it doesn't disrupt the readability of the scenario. Readability of the scenario is always more important than anything else. So I definitely would try to focus that. And in many cases, that's just a bad luck situation that you have a big feature file. All of them are starting with the given user is authenticated. And at the end, a new one comes which doesn't need an authenticated user. And then you have to undo the background. Fortunately, you cannot make it selective for a specific part of the feature file. It's always global to the entire feature file, and it's only applied to that feature file only, and not to multiple feature files. So basically, these were the three readability improvement topic that I just wanted to have a very brief highlight: tags, feature description, and the background section. Obviously, if you can check them up more in detail in the documentation as well, but I think they are pretty obvious things to use. Okay, and with that, actually, we kind of finished with our lesson 2. So let's do a wrap up. So these were basically the topics that we went through. And again, just like yesterday, I was trying to find some key facts that I would like you to bring home from this session. So these are the formulation is used to document the examples and make them ready for automation. So it's primarily the documentation kind of activity. The scenario should be connected to business rules. Now I have mentioned that, I think maybe even too many times. Scenario should follow these be brief principles: business language, real data, intention revealing, essential, focused, and brief. And hopefully through that example that you have seen, it's much better sticking into your head how these principles should be imagined and what these things really mean. Generally, we suggest to keep the I think it's a good thing to keep the scenarios automation agnostic. It looks like controversial, but actually by making it automation agnostic, you are opening up a new options for the automation. So you can choose between options and you can find a better one. Scenario outlines are useful for data-driven problems, but be careful with generating too many examples, and you can improve the readability with text, markdown, background, and some other things. Okay, so just as a reference, I will have the Gherkin cheat sheet. You will anyway receive the slides as well. So you have the basic Gherkin cheat sheet here, and there is an advanced Gherkin cheat sheet where the scenario outline, the background, and some other things are described that we have seen. You will also get these together with the slides next week. And with that, basically, we are done with our core part, and we will move on to the Q&A. But before that, there will be a poll, I think. But just before we do that, I would like to highlight, just as I said yesterday, if you use this particular coupon code on LeanPub, then you can get 50% off. So basically, you can get the 2 books for $10, which is normally 1 book is $10. So that it's a good deal. Yeah, hand over to Andy.
Good. Now the poll is not necessary today.
Okay.
So Let's jump quite into the questions. And the first one is, and you just answered it. The people were asking if they can get a copy of the slides.
Yes. We forgot to mention that we not only provide the videos, but you will also get the slides in PDF.
Yes. Next week earliest. And when all days are over, so somewhere next week.
Yeah. Okay.
Need some time to upload everything and process. So good. That was the first one. So the next one has some comments also to it. Kieran is asking, can we use and after when steps?
So
yeah,
I think
the comments
so technically you can. So SpecFlow will not say no. But if you use end step after the when, what you literally did, you have created multiple when steps. So now, if you say that the when steps are describing that action which is triggering the outcome, then obviously the first one is not triggering the outcome because you need the second one as well to be able to see the outcome. So actually what you, from the two when steps, basically the first one was essentially a given. You were setting up a context and the second one was basically triggering the outcome. So typically when you have this situation that you feel that you need multiple when steps, then basically there are two options. One option is that maybe one of them is actually a given. It's not really a big difference. It's just it doesn't matter whether it's a given or a when, but it makes sense to make that clear to yourself at least. So it's either a given, so either one of them is a given, or maybe you are doing it in a too low-level abstraction. So maybe you should step back a little bit, and maybe that two steps are actually a single step, and that is going to be your single when step at the end.
Yeah. Good. Hope it answered it. So now next question. So Gaspar, do you have a sample timeline on how your team engages in all the various BDD activities in parallel with Scrum, Agile ceremonies, discovery, example mapping, workshops, formulation session, and when these occur in proximity to the start of a sprint? Can imagine that getting started with this process, the team would need at least 1 to 2 sprints lead time to get the details of the feature scenarios ironed out before the TDD feature implementation tickets are actually added.
Makes sense. Yeah. There are no very fixed answers, but your assumption was right. So that to be able to have these things, you have to think a little bit ahead. But this is not really related to BDD. I mean, in any kind of Scrum process, you have to start preparing your user story to be able to be taken in the next sprint. So typically the timeline is not changing just by applying BDD. So typically what the teams are doing, they are just doing the discovery thing at the time when you would normally do this, the user story refinement, which is typically happening 2 weeks before the actual sprint starts. So yes, that's the timeline. So typically 1-2 weeks before the sprint starts, you start preparing for the user stories that you will move on with. You start discovering the details of that. So you will have a bunch of examples. You will do a lot of other things as well, like estimation, whatever, trying to fix the open questions and many other things. And hopefully by the time when the sprint starts, you have your stories discovered. You have a good understanding of them by having some examples. Now, yesterday in the Q&A, we were talking about that whether you start formulating the examples before the sprint or after the sprint, both of them are valid. It's mainly depending on how much you typically run into some blocking problems during formulation. And the rest is basically just fitting into the normal Scrum or Agile timeline. So normally with BDD, you don't really need to introduce any new ceremony. Basically, these things are simply fitting into the existing process.
Yeah. And Ian has a quick follow-up question to it. What percent of your developer time is going into preparation work, not in the current sprint?
It's a, you will hate this answer, but that's a wrong question. Okay, so that how much time of your plane pilots is taken for checking whether the plane will operate perfectly? Who knows, right? So that if I say 20%, oh, 20%, and most of the time planes are just working fine, so that 20% is unnecessary, right? So that's a wrong question. So the point is that I think uh, the, uh, if you are applying BDD, you should check the overall time. So the overall time should not be longer than it used to be. So maybe when you, of course, when you just new to BDD, then there is a learning curve. So definitely then you need a little bit more time. But once you get into the rhythm, the overall time should be the same or even shorter. And this is what I also experienced, because by having a little bit more preparation, you will have much less in-sprint questions. And answering a question in the discovery session is maybe 20 seconds. Answering the same question while the sprint has already started, 2 hours, because you have to find your product owner, make a meeting, find a slot, whatever, and then redo the things that you already done. That's the thing that you are comparing. I wouldn't try to make it's even if you start reporting this separately, then it will lead to wrong conclusions at the end. So think about the overall time. Measure the cycle time of your process. How many days are needed from starting the story to finishing the story? And you will see that by applying BDD, this time should get shorter and shorter.
And at the end, probably 100% of your time is working on the product.
Yeah.
And that's the thing what counts.
Exactly.
Good. Thank you, Gaspard. So
there are more questions than I answer, so it's getting worse and worse from the
yeah, the
statistics.
numbers is rising.
That's
So next question. How should I decide a test cases should be converted in unit tests, UI automation, or in API tests to increase testing coverage?
There is no simple answer for that. You have to discuss it with your team. You have to evaluate what kind of other tests you have, what are the pros and the cons of different, and you have to make a test strategy that considers all of these together. There will be no easy answer, unfortunately, for that. The only easy answer I can get, that I have never seen a project with only UI tests succeeding. I mean, a meaningfully sized project, because UI tests are, at least in the current days, are still too brittle and too slow. So that if you try to make all of your tests as end-to-end tests, which is this ice cream cone kind of shape of the test pyramid, I have never seen it working. Maybe in some cases it would work, but definitely that's something that I would, I would think twice.
Yeah. Good. Thank you. So next question is, do we have the option to have test data in external files like CSVs, JSON, XML?
So you have to be careful with that, because if you are putting these data into an external file, that means these are not visible in the feature file, which means that if you want to get feedback from that, then people who are giving the feedback based on that will not see that data. So how can I judge whether your calculation is right or wrong if I don't see what the price that you have calculated, that you were counting with were? So it's a dangerous thing. Sometimes you do need that. So I'm not saying that this is an impossible scenario, but you should really be careful with that. There is a plugin for SpecFlow where you can input scenario outline examples from Excel files or CSV files, but yeah, be careful with that.
Yeah.
Those are hidden details, and they will make the judgment of the scenario impossible or hard.
Yes. Good. Next question. About formulating steps. So the question is, when I check the homepage or when the user checks the homepage?
I understand. Very good question. So the thing is that if your application is used by a single user only, and that single user has a single role, then probably the I form is would be very convenient for you. But typically the systems are not like that. And therefore the suggestion is that don't use the I form, because sooner or later you will anyway have scenarios where this I will be too confusing. So generally we recommend to use this third person form. The user is blah, blah, blah. When you just playing with BDD or just make some demo scenarios, of course, there is no problem with using the I, but in real situations, I would try to avoid that unless you really have a single person application or something like that.
Yeah. Good, thank you for that. So, next question. What version of SpecFlow has rule keyword implemented? Do we need any extra plugin to use the same?
I don't remember the exact version number, but it has been there for a while. But yes, the Visual Studio plugin also needs to understand the rule keyword, otherwise it gets confused. If you use Visual Studio 2022 version that already knows the rule keyword, or if you are using an older version of the Visual Studio, then you need to use the DevRoom plugin to be able to understand that it provides a highlight for that. Otherwise, it will work. So the test will run. It's just the usability of the Visual Studio extension is going to be broken. Yeah, and the Rider plugin is also supporting rule keyword, as far as I remember.
Yes. Good. Next question about the rule keyword. So what's the difference between feature and rule keywords? Does the rule keyword group scenarios that follow a similar execution path for one feature?
I wouldn't phrase it like that, but yes, kind of. So that it's basically grouping scenarios that are targeting the same rule. Yeah, so that's, yeah. So typically for a feature, you have, yeah, I don't know, I don't have now a better example.
Yeah, it's group, it doesn't change any execution path.
No, it's not.
Of your scenarios. There would be also a background for the rule keyword, but this is not supported to SpecFlow at the moment. So
it's only documentation purpose right now.
Yes.
But it's very good documentation, so it makes sense to take care of that. I recommend you to check out the sample code and browse through the feature files. They are all grouped by rules, and there you will see a couple of other examples for what does that mean to have a rule inside a feature.
Good. There's a question, it's already answered, but I repeat it anyway, that we have it on record and a lot of people see it. The question is if there's a way to not have SpecFlow run the background for a scenario in a feature file.
No.
No, you need to split this up in multiple feature files. Or don't start using background anyway.
Yeah.
So next question. Do you think BDD will be a good tool, will be good for tools that involve complex data visualization? Example, we have a web application used for vibration analysis. I mostly have charts and tools built on top of charts.
Good question. So the question is whether you can find some way how you can describe your expectations in words. I never did that with such kind of applications. Yeah, maybe approval testing is a thing that I would definitely look to. It's not related to BDD, at least not directly. Yeah, and maybe some aspects of your charts can be also described as business expectation, but definitely the charts itself are much more visual. It's very hard to describe their behavior in words and verify that.
Yeah, all visualization stuff is is hard. What if you're talking about complex data? One was a colleague of mine did is drawing ASCII art for organizational structures. What he then parsed it in his binding, so he had some semi-graphical display in his feature files, and the rest did the automation. But it's complex data, not visualization of charts. But good. Next question. The feature file, as we use background keyword to set the prerequisites. Is there any keyword available in Gurgle which can be used for cleanup with the feature file only?
No, because cleanup is an automation concern. It's not a business concern. You can do cleanup, so there is functionality after scenario hooks, but that's not a specification concern, or at least, I cannot really imagine. If it's a concern, then it would be a then step that something has happened at the end. But
Yes, so you have to use hooks for that. So we are getting done with a certain question in 5 minutes. That won't fit.
Let's see.
Rajev is asking if there are other types of formulation examples than given when then.
With BDD, the given when then is the most commonly used. Technically, you can also use asterisks, so this star marks as well as the steps. I've never seen that be used in a real situation. So the given when then is at least with these cucumber style BDD frameworks, that's your friend.
Yeah. So next question. In practice, how easy is it to ensure consistency in writing the scenarios, reusing existing components of scenarios, handing over work to newcomers, etc. And what problems can inconsistency cause?
On Thursday, we will come back to this topic. Very good question.
Good. Next one. Are texts predefined or at the user's discretion? It's usually, they are free text, so
it's free text, yes. So no, not predefined. If we understand the question well, yeah.
Yeah, the only predefined tag is
tags.
ignore. Ignore.
Yeah. Sorry, now I mixed up tags with text. So yes, normally these are absolutely defined by you. The only exception is the ignore tag, which turns the scenario to be an ignore test, which is anyway something you shouldn't do. So basically, it's yours. So you should define. You can make a team agreement about the tags that you are using.
Good. Next one, still some time left. For example, authenticate the user is in the background. If another feature file needs this step, wouldn't it be better to do this within a given step to reduce duplication in each feature file?
Yeah, so these are the typical things with the background. So that yes, for one feature file it works, but very quickly realize that you need it in multiple feature files. Then you will, if you use background here but not background there, it's not so easy to move the scenarios from one to the other. And all of these things are making many people not really using. So yeah, don't use background so much at least. So yeah.
Good, still some time left. What is the difference between scenario outline and tables?
And syntactically, they look the same. So but data tables always belong to a single step. So basically, it's just an attachment to that step. But it's at the end, it will be still a single scenario that is executed. Scenario outlines. That table is generating new tests. So that's the difference. So that the scenario outline is generating multiple tests. The data table is still having a single test, but it is a bunch of data inside. You need a little bit of practice. Again, try to check out the sample application and you will see example of a scenario outline and normal scenario with data table and play with it and then you will see how that feels.
Good. And I think the last question for today is if you can pass data from one scenario to another scenario.
We will talk about that tomorrow a little bit, yes.
If it's good is another question. Good. And with that, it's 5 o'clock.
Yeah, let's finish for today. There are 9 questions remaining. I will quickly scan them through, and if there are some in there which are generally generic enough, so that then I will try to find some time to at least summarize the answers for them tomorrow. But otherwise, yeah. So thank you everyone for joining today's session. I hope you will also come tomorrow, where we will see SpecFlow things, and yeah. See you tomorrow.
See you tomorrow. Bye.
Bye-bye.